Epistemology is the study of how you come to know something. What are valid ways of coming to know? Now, anytime you're talking about epistemology, on the back end of that also is metaphysics. What is metaphysics then? Well, those are the objects that you're claiming to be coming to knowledge of. So last week we talked about truths as timeless, Platonic forms. Plato was a rationalist, Descartes was a rationalist. So we have the idea that when you're doing analytic thinking logically, mathematics, that you are perceiving that which is spaceless and timeless, forms that are universal. Those things which inform anything to be what that thing is. So, you could think of this, now I'm no biologist, but you could think of this somewhat as like biology. Is it the case that we grow, our molecules divide according to DNA? Is that correct? Right? So that DNA, is that the code of the molecule? Namely, it's true of a given molecule and only of a molecule, such that we can't think of the DNA in and of itself, such that we can't use that DNA code to reprogram a different cell. Is that true? No, that's not true. So the DNA is the code by which a thing is what it is. So you look at any horse, and it has a certain DNA, which then all horses have. So you could almost think of that in Platonic terms as the form horseness, or in this case, the DNA that makes the horse be what it is, which every horse has, without which it's not a horse. Okay? Now, that DNA itself, though, is it true only of a given molecule? No, it's true of all the molecules. Okay, but can it be true of a different molecule which is re-encoded? Yes. Okay, so what about the DNA code itself? Well, a rationalist would say that's an idea. So you have the form horseness, which all horses follow, which then that form or that DNA, if it encodes any molecule, will then be a horse molecule. Okay, what's the DNA itself then? Well, Plato would say, so it itself is spaceless, timeless, not a physical thing. So that the best way of coming to knowledge, says a rationalist like a Plato or a Descartes, is by mathematics or codes, abstracting the design from nature, which they think came first, and informed nature for nature to become what it becomes. So that the essence of a thing itself is not a thing. So the best way to know the world is by doing mathematics and logic. In order to understand horseness best, you need, or any physical thing, the basic building blocks are going to involve physics, and the language of physics is math. So if you really want to understand the nature of anything, you have to do math, which deals with principles, laws, truths that are spaceless, timeless. That's what the rationalist argues is the nature of them. Yes? Yeah, so that means that, well, now who cares what I think or what I say, right? So let's do it in the context of what is, now you also talked about Leibniz and Spinoza this week, right? You also read that, right? So if you're talking about Leibniz or Spinoza or Descartes or Plato, we're all in this camp of the rationalists. And they have a view which, okay, I'm ready to just come out with it myself personally. Yeah, I think it's a universal language, right? That it doesn't make much sense to say, okay, what's your mathematical truths? Given your sexual preference, right? You going to ask that in a math class? Or your race, or whatever. You know, that doesn't, you're not, when you're talking about the truth of something in mathematics, you're not saying that, but it's true for this gender, right? Or for this race. No, it's just true. Universal, right? So for the rationalists then, these universal absolute truths are the foundation of nature and the primary way of understanding nature. So the rationalist gives priority in epistemology being the way of knowing, that of the mind, rationality. Whereas the empiricists, who we haven't come to them yet, but instead they're going to say, no, the priority comes from the senses and experience, not from the mind. Yes?
So, what Aristotle says?
Well, it's good to read like Plato and Aristotle together as kind of understanding, using both of them to help understand the thing rather than as though they're so juxtaposed. Because often, yes, does Aristotle say that when I am thinking on the forms, like some mathematical truth in nature, is it the case that with my spaceless, timeless soul or mind or consciousness, I am reflecting on these eternal truths, the forms? No, that's Plato. That's Platonism. Okay, but then is he saying, because it's the case that these forms never exist apart from nature, that we only abstract them from nature. So we observe many horses, and then we abstract from our experience what it is that basically is horseness. So we abstracted it from nature because of our senses, as though it's impossible that there be this spaceless, timeless dimension which Plato referred to. So, for example, the mind or consciousness being a soul. Well, people very much emphasized the idea in Aristotle, because he was much more of a naturalist, that he did not believe that life after death would be possible. While he just has something in the De Anima, though, where he talks about the soul of a person being like a sailor on a ship. Well, you don't have to think too long to realize that the ship can come to port and the sailor can get off the ship, and yet the sailor still exists, right? So that analogy isn't especially helpful. Also, when you consider something that often is just ignored with Aristotle, to try to make him out to be like an atheist, rationalist, saying there can't be life after death, right? Wait a minute now. What about how is it that the world got its start? Well, it got its start from the absolute, from mind, God. This God, the unmoved mover. So, are we talking about theism in the Jewish sense? No. This God who comes, to Moses through the burning bush and gives the laws, because this God cares about how we live our lives, and then we're going to be judged by this God according to that. No. Okay, does that mean then that Aristotle says, so it's impossible ever to have a being that is not enmattered? No, definitely not. Because you've got the unmoved mover, who is the mind, God, that contemplates God's self eternally. So involved with us in our world once God got us going? No. Okay, but a God who doesn't have these eternal forms, doesn't think, doesn't contemplate? No. This God is that way. Okay, so this is epistemology. What is the best way of coming to know something? All right, so I said that metaphysics, though, is sort of like the other side of this coin, because anytime you're talking about what's the best way of coming to know something, well, then you're talking about that thing which you're coming to know. When you're talking about it from that angle, you're talking metaphysics. So metaphysics has to do with what exists. What exists. Now we're not focusing on how is it that we come to know what exists, what are valid methods to use in coming to know, but rather what types of things do exist, right? So we can have different categories for that. We can argue about this stuff. We talked earlier about possibilities of coming to know things that 100 years ago you'd only find it like in a sci-fi book or a religious book, and in philosophy it would just be poo-pooed. It's ridiculous. But with modern physics, not that I'm any physicist, I'm not, but from a layman's understanding, we come to realize that, wait a minute, we have 11 dimensions, not just 3 or 4, right? So there's a lot to our own world that we are not aware of. On top of that, physicists talk about even other universes, parallel universes, meaning that if we had sufficient energy to break through this fabric of space-time, we would be able, theoretically speaking, to enter a different universe. So if there are beings that are far more advanced than us, is it possible then that they could even come from a different universe into our universe? Or, less radically, is it possible that there are things that exist within our dimension, but not in the three aspects of it that we're able to know? One of the others, in the other 7 dimensions of our universe that we don't have access to through our senses. So none of this is crazy talk. The answer to all this stuff is yes. Well, if that's possible, then what kind of entities might it be that we could take seriously now? So some of you brought up aliens. Is it possible that aliens exist? Well, we tend to think only in the categories that we at first know, which are biological life requiring water. So, are we actively looking for planets that has water and an atmosphere that can support it, and then conclude from that that would be a good bet for a place to look where there might be life? Yes, we're actively looking for that, right? Have we spent many millions of dollars in SETI and looking for aliens? Yes, we have, and we still are. So the idea is that if we have billions of planets, each within billions of galaxies, and we know that we have life here we are, well, given that, wouldn't you think the odds would be that there would be biological life elsewhere too, right? So we're asking then, is it possible that aliens exist, which actually are physical? Okay, well, that is a metaphysical question. Now, I know I'm asking it in kind of a sci-fi, shocking way, but with the idea that gains your interest. Okay, but beyond that, is it possible that things exist which are life, but not as we know it? So we talked about epiphenomenalism and consciousness as being an emergent property, meaning that if you have something that's physical of sufficient complexity, consciousness emerges. Okay, if that's the case, then could it be true that you will have a robot one day that will then take over the world? Right? What if you have a supercomputer? I mean, we do have computers that are all collected together, right? They're all connected together, operating as one massive supercomputer. Okay, what if it reaches sufficient complexity? Anybody think of any movies that show this sort of a thing, right? The computer, iRobot, yes. The computer got so smart that then the computer was overtaking the human race, right? Okay, well, that's the idea then, that consciousness emerges given sufficient complexity. So maybe we're asking metaphysics here then. What kind of entities exist? Okay, maybe aliens exist which are not biological, which are actually mechanical, but which nonetheless, do exist. Okay, then we can push the envelope further and ask, is it possible that there are life forms that exist in ways that we don't understand, such that they're not mechanical, they're not biological, and yet they are self-conscious entities? Again, what are we doing here? Metaphysics. Are we doing epistemology? Are we asking, what's the best way to come to know this? Is it going to be through infrared light? Is it going to be through radio waves? Is it going to be through meditation? Is it going to, if it's meditation, is it going to be through stilling the mind, or is it going to be through some sort of an incantation, or how is it we're going to come to know? Okay, we're not asking that now, are we? If we were, we'd be asking metaphysics. But if you're doing epistemology. But if we're doing epistemology, it's about metaphysics, though. It's about something that you're coming to know, and whether your method is valid for coming to know that thing. So we're not asking how we come to know this stuff. We're asking about possibilities in metaphysics, in a sci-fi way, in an interesting way. What kinds of things might exist? Okay, is it possible then that we have blinders on about the existence of certain types of things given our epistemology? Because you see, if you're going to insist that the only way to come to know anything is by using a certain thing, well, that's going to limit what kinds of things you're going to think could exist, right? I mean, you can imagine with a vehicle, right? Everything comes down to the motorcycle. You're too young to understand this. You probably think that's funny, I know. But as you get a little older, a little more experienced, you're going to understand that all of reality, actually, it's about the motorcycle, okay? I know you're looking at me funny, right? But I hope, eventually you keep doing philosophy, you'll come to understand that, okay? No, actually, I'm kidding. But it does serve for a nice example. Because if you have to do an escape, what's the best way to do it? Is it a motorcycle? Well, not in the winter. Okay, all right, but it's not winter. So what's the best way to make an escape? Well, is it going to be a dual sport motorcycle that can handle sand and dirt really well and big shocks that give a lot so that you can go through rough terrain? Well, that, depends on the terrain that you're planning on riding on, right? Or what about, what about a Ninja? 190 miles an hour. That's what you want to get away, right? Well, no. Depending on the terrain you're on, right? You'd want, it just depends. It all depends, right? What's the best vehicle for you to buy? Well, it depends. Minivan, those are great. They're so versatile. They have a lot of room, right? Isn't that great? Well, I think they're really boring for one thing. But for another thing, no. I mean, what if you'd rather have a Honda Fit? Because what you actually need to focus on is super great gas mileage, like over 40 miles a gallon. Okay, well then the Honda Fit is what you should get, not the minivan, right? It just all depends on what is it you're wanting to do. What is it? The same sort of thing then with epistemology, right? So if what you're wanting to study is the molecular structure of this coffee, you're asking me what kind of coffee it is it that I'm drinking? Okay, well we really should go, to a chemistry department for that one, right? Because their methods of knowing are the methods that will give us our answer, correct? Okay, are there other methods of knowing then which would give us different answers? Such that if we disregard those methods of knowing, well, maybe that's good. If the method of knowing is put on a tinfoil hat because that way you're going to receive radio frequencies from outer space, which is going to put your mind in the right sphere to be able to pick up signals from aliens. All right, I'm betting that's a bad method of epistemology for coming to know something about metaphysics, right? But if out of hand you say the only way to validly come to know anything is the epistemology that says if it's not known by math or science, analytic truths or empirical truths, if it's not known by one of those ways, forget about it, don't ask the question, don't talk about it. Okay, why? How is that any less dogmatic than somebody says the only way to come to know something is by clearing your mind of all mental modifications, focusing on yourself as the Buddha nature? Or in saying that, okay, this scripture from this religion is the revealed word, so the only way to come to learn anything about anything is read that scripture. How is it any less dogmatic? Because if you restrict your epistemology so much, it's going to restrict your metaphysics. Meaning it will restrict the type of entities that you would allow yourself to think possibly as existing. So you would only look in what we call the physical realm. Even though now what we know of the physical realm, well, actually 84% of that, we know it's the I know not what, as John Locke has said. Substance, whatever. No, we call it dark matter. Oh, that's very helpful. Dark matter, not dark energy, right? So all we actually know is like 4% through our senses, and the other 96% is we don't know. So number one, there's a big problem if you're going to limit your epistemology to only the physical, because we're not even able to define the physical anymore hardly. But if you open up your epistemology such that a way of coming to know could be, well, maybe the argument for the best explanation. We're not talking just about opinions and feelings here. We're talking about argument and rationality. And we're also not just talking about, a faith, just a belief. But we're also saying that arguments which will be about the preponderance of reason, not just about what we can physically experience or what we can improve analytically, like in mathematics. Okay, well, if that's what we've got, is the argument to the best explanation, that perhaps could open up metaphysics to the possibility that, hey, maybe the lights that people saw in the sky in Arizona in 1996, the governor and all the news media and thousands of people on multiple occasions, rather than just dismissing that out of hand, maybe even rather than going with our given epistemology or metaphysics of it must be physical, those must be spaceships, those lights, I don't know, really powerful halogen lights or something. Well, it opens up the possibility to say, gee, maybe what other cultures have been saying throughout the centuries and around the world and presently, that there actually are spirits. and that perhaps those are spirits that are appearing that we're somehow able to see sometimes, or maybe they're spirits that can manifest themselves physically such that we're able to see them. So their true nature is spiritual, but yet they manifest into the physical. Wow, this is really dangerous stuff, right? If you expand your epistemology such that you expand your metaphysics, you'll be taking seriously possibilities, not that you believe them, but that you actually will reason about, and then people will think that you believe in black helicopters and you probably have a tinfoil hat in your own closet, right? Well, that's okay. We're not worried about political correctness. We're not worried about a popularity contest. We're considering truth and opening our mind to various possibilities. That's called honest, open, fair-minded, rational dialogue. All right. Have a great night.